Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. The Legion's mission is to equip the armed forces through life and help them to take the best from their service experience. So promoting good mental health is a very important part of our work. In terms of starting, so how big is the issue? How big is this community? The King Centre for Military Health has published probably the most comprehensive research on mental health in the serving armed forces and increasingly in the veteran community in the UK. And the view drawn so far from their longitudinal study, which is now nearly 15 years old, is that the mental health of the UK armed forces, according to them, is surviving well in terms of the war in Iraq and the continuing war in Afghanistan. But by that what they mean is that there's currently no evidence on a large scale to support a significant for them to feel that they can support the view that there is a significant increase in mental health trauma. And I think they are particularly focusing on post-traumatic stress disorder. Nevertheless, their research does show that there are a number of areas of concern. Firstly, and they document this well, that the deployment to either Iraq and Afghanistan has resulted in higher levels of alcohol misuse than amongst the non-deployed or the equivalent civilian population. And secondly, that there's an increase in mental health problems, particularly in those in combat roles, and especially in those in the reserve forces. And reserve forces now makes up almost 10% of the deployed troops, so that's a significant increase over previous times. We believe, I think therefore, that many people may well have developed psychiatric injury as a result of this service, but it will probably remain hidden to either the military or the NHS, or potentially also indeed to the many charities in the sector. And this is not because individuals haven't yet developed those problems, but because they admit that they haven't yet made a decision to come forward for help. Secondly, many of the individuals probably already have left the services and returned to civilian life. And the most vulnerable of these are those who leave the armed forces early, most probably within the first 4 years, because early service leavers are at the greatest risk of wider range of social problems, things like debt, alcohol, drug misuse, unemployment, homelessness, and self-harm and so on. This poses a problem for the Ministry of Defence and the government in general, because at present, the longer you serve, the greater the support and assistance you receive in terms of your resettlement. Yet those who are most in need are most often to be found in the ranks of the early service leaver, some 3,000 to 4,000 a year. So those who receive the most are those who perhaps deserve or have earned the most, but paradoxically don't need it. So there is a review looking at the moment at this area, and there are currently 2 early service leaver pilots being conducted at Catterick Garrison and Purbright Garrison, which are designed really to demonstrate the value of reversing this policy. Interestingly, none of those 2 pilots are actually funded by the government at the moment. Both of them are actually funded by individual providers. One of them is a commercial training provider, A4E, and one of them is the group of service charities that we were referring to earlier, using Forces in Mind Trust funding. And the British Legion and a number of other partners are involved in that pilot. So the military health services, the NHS and the service charities expect and are already experiencing an increased demand for their services in those who return from Iraq and Afghanistan. And this reflects the fact that personnel are continuing to deploy. Some are now on their 4th tours, and it appears that some are also presenting earlier. And we really hope to a large extent that this continues, because the earlier they come forward, the earlier we can actually get help and support to them. That said, and as I think you already mentioned, Sharon, the armed forces have made real strides in recognising that not just the physical, but also the mental costs of conflict over the last 5 years. But the numerous initiatives in place, which I'm going to go and talk to you a little bit about, will not eliminate the stigma of mental disorder, which means the single greatest barrier impeding those who need help from seeking it is this stigma. So early intervention is therefore very much important to us, and is very much a feature of most of the programmes for support that are currently in place. Since 2005, the Legion campaigned for a greater commitment to health support from the service community through our Honour the Cabinet campaign. And since then, there's been a real effort, particularly by health, I think, to increase access and to understand the community. That's culminated in a number of reviews, and a number of you might have heard of, by Dr. Andrew Morrison. One of them was into mental health, and one of them was into prosthetics. And both of those are really now being implemented. And I'm just going to touch on those, the programmes that are currently available. And I'm afraid we're going to get another sort of slab of acronyms. So I'll go through these, but I have left what I've been talking to you today about behind, so that you'll be able to go back to it for reference. So TRIM, Trauma Risk Management, MAP, the Medical Assessment Programme, the WIS Recovery Programme. The Armed Forces has its own series of initiatives around IAPT, which I think you've been talking about earlier today. The Big White Wall, and Veterans Information Service, which is planned but has not yet been activated. So for serving personnel on the front line, TRIM is the programme designed to increase mental health awareness amongst the chain of command throughout the military. TRIM is the biggest programme used by all 3 branches of the services. The Royal Navy's Operational Stress Management Team at Portsmouth helped pioneer this now widely used trauma risk management system for troops. And it's really to help people who encounter traumatic episodes while they're deployed in operations. And the Surgeon General's Office is now looking at other techniques to assist in identifying potential stress issues, the best way to deal with them while people are still in operation. Although it's thought that post-traumatic illnesses can't be prevented, they can be successfully treated. And the key to successful outcome is early identification for those who are given a diagnosis of PTSD, a combination of medication and talking therapy. Not one without the other. And it's this premise which has led to the research, development and use of trauma risk management throughout all 3 services. TRIM is used to identify the signs and symptoms of stress at an early stage. Service personnel are trained as TRIM practitioners to provide support and conduct risk assessments of colleagues with their units who may need them when they need help. The barrier in TRIM, though, is that it's still very hard for those serving in the armed forces to come forward to overcome the stigma issue of admitting psychological problems and symptoms, because they fear how that will affect their potential, their career potential, their selection for promotion, their deployment, and their place in the team. In a very strong ethos workforce, that team ownership and being part of the team is very, very important. However, TRIM is starting to make a difference, and it is probably the most important thing that units can do to start to get the discussion going and the dialogue open. I'm going to use some cartoon slides to illustrate the points, rather than give you a whole series of different bits of PowerPoint presentations on lots of information. So you will be able to access what I'm saying later, and hopefully this will keep you awake. So what about mental health support for injured personnel? Supporting returning personnel transitioning from the military into civilian life is now recognised as a key opportunity not to be missed and to be done professionally. So the creation of the Wounded, Injured and Sick Recovery Programme back in 2008 has been provided to support people with physical and trauma injuries, as well as people with long-term illnesses, to either return to operational duty or to transit into civilian life. Anyone who is serving and registered for more than 56 days as sick is is now assigned under the command of one of 16 new wounded and sick personnel recovery units. There are about 1,000 personnel in this system at the moment, and they are from all three branches of the armed forces, but they're predominantly from the army. And those who are with trauma or mental illness make up what is probably about 40% of that group. The personnel recovery centres provide core courses and an individual recovery plan to assist the recovery back either to duty, as I say, or following medical discharge on into civilian life. The British Legion and Help the Heroes are the primary partners of this programme, but many other of the charitable military organisations are also involved in supporting this effort, and increasingly mainstream mental health and other organisations are taking part in the development of this capability. The benefits of a combination of focused, professionally coached and accessible sport activities, things like archery, wheelchair basketball, fishing, canoeing, alongside group work, exercise and leadership exercises are proving in the centre that we're running in Littleton to be very effective at giving people a boost on their recovery pathway and helping them reconnect with skills they thought they'd lost and building the confidence and motivation to really to refocus their lives and make a successful transition. And that's as much relevant for people who are coming out with depression or some forms of mental health problems as it is for people with physical injuries. The Armed Forces Compensation Scheme is a scheme which provides recompense for those who are injured during their service. And since 2005, servicemen and women have been able to claim for these injuries while serving, the first time they've ever been to before. And they have up to 7 years after they leave. Now, the reason I'm mentioning it, because it's an important part of an individual's treatment, both having that support, but that support is made on the basis of people also having access to treatment and support from the NHS. The scheme is based on a full and final settlement model, and it's made up of a tariff table of final settlement payments for injury descriptors. And it's administered by lay assessors in the Service of Persons and Veterans Agency. The scheme aims to reflect the impact of the injury or the condition on their life and employment, encourages people to engage in treatment, promotes sustainable employment, and of course improved health outcomes. And it's been designed to be enabling rather than to be a scheme that encourages dependency. The Legion and Combat Stress have been working together with the Department of Health. Been very happy with, have not been very happy, I should say, with the tariff levels for mental health injuries since it was introduced. And this month, we have submitted some evidence to the Independent Medical Expert Group, which has been set up since the scheme was reviewed. And this expert group is now hopefully going to be looking at some of our recommendations. And I won't go into the detail of these, but I do believe they're an important part of the programmes of work available. And one of the things that we're advocating is that at the moment the table gives you a compensation, and if you get to a certain level you also get a guaranteed income payment. It's for people with mental or trauma injuries to separate the connection between those two, so that someone could have a high compensation level but not necessarily a support for their long-term employment depending on the nature of their condition. Or someone might actually get both because of the disabling impact their trauma has on their ability to go to work. We're also advocating that financial incentives for employers should be given to take on veterans with mental health compensation awards to get them into employment. Guarantees of treatment for those with compensation awards, which at the moment are very variable in terms of where they live across the country. We've asked them to look at the term for the compensation itself because it's very important what you call something in terms of how people feel about compensation. We've also asked them to look at full and final settlements, as I said, without a support an employment support factor. GPs and community mental health play a very big part in supporting the armed forces. And this was a cartoon that was drawn out of a recent user-led event we had. And GPs were absolutely top of the conversation. A new programme of mental health outreach has been initiated through the Department of Health since the Morrison report. Dr Morrison's report initiated 10 mental health initiatives across England. Funding was £1.5 million for the next 4 years, and we're now 2 years into that programme. Not all 10 are yet fully established. There's a clinical service now in the North East, the East Midlands, in London, and in Avon, Wiltshire, and one just started in Surrey. And these programmes offer signposting to improving access to psychological therapies programmes, and I'm sure that we've already or going to have that covered in the rest of your programme today. There's a very good example of a project of this kind in Wales. Professor Jonathan Bisson, the Director of Research and Development for Cardiff University, is leading the Wales response. In Wales, the All Wales Veterinary Health and Wellbeing Service was launched in April 2010 and is funded actually by the Welsh Government. The service is designed to improve health and wellbeing of veterans, so it includes physical and mental health, and enables them to access their services and tailor to their individual needs and facilitate their improved engagement with the NHS and other services. The assessment process individuals receive is in a care-managed plan, and it's developed very much in conjunction with all of the agencies, both the statutory bodies, but also many of the charitable organisations active in the area. And therefore looks at the whole range of the individual's life, their functioning, their financial situation, their benefits, their accommodation, their adjustment to civilian life, vocational training, the whole package, which really enables individuals who are engaging with the programme. The Morrison report recommended also the creation of a Veterans Information Service, and at the moment that's something that's still the last piece of the jigsaw to be put in place. But what they have put in place in the meantime is a relationship with something which the Tavistock Institute runs called the Big White Wall. I don't know if any of you in this room have used the Big White Wall, but the Big White Wall is now available, not in the same way that I think it has been brought into by trusts around the country, but for anyone who served in the armed forces or their family members. And so they can log on and actually access that service wherever they happen to live in the country. And that is providing some information and some opportunities. And the most important piece about that, I think, is the fact that it's anonymous. And particularly for the armed forces and veteran community, the fact that it's anonymous is very important. The mental health of families of the injured. This is an area that is only just really starting to get people getting engaged with. And I think over the last 6 months, the Defence Recovery Command is beginning to get to grips with it, and there are a number of programmes that are being delivered by the individual recovery centres around the country. In Edinburgh, in our centre in Germany, families are welcome to drop in and visit and stay while someone is staying there during the course. At Edward House, down in the south, that also open their doors to families in the evenings and the weekends, and starting to share some of the courses designed for injured veterans with their families, and beginning to see the real benefit of that. Another programme available for people who've left the armed forces is the medical assessment programme. The MAP's been in place actually for quite a long time, but the medical assessment programme provides a second mental health examination for veterans who don't feel that they've had or are having a good hearing from their general practitioner. And that's really in place for anyone who's been in operational service since 1982. The MAP is located at St Thomas's Hospital in London, and it's headed by a consultant psychiatrist with access to a wide range of military experience and knowledge of the military community and matters and the Ministry of Defence. And whilst it didn't have a very good press for veterans of the first Iraq War, the service is now much better than it was and has real high-quality professionals working in it. And I think, unfortunately, because of its early reputation, is not as well used. And I would encourage people who you may come across who don't feel their GP really understands their circumstances to use the MAP. Because if the MAP isn't used, that is a programme that may well disappear, and therefore it will be something that is will be a shame not to be there to provide people with that second opinion option. In May 2012, the Legion and Combat Stress commissioned a report entitled Unsung Heroes, a report that we did actually through the Mental Health Foundation. And the study was a desktop study of research and published material on what we know about how families and children of service personnel are supported to deal with the emotional and psychological impact of deployment and training. In the UK, the armed forces undergo unprecedented restructuring, and to deliver a new employment model. This report examines the services already in place for families and identifies areas where more evidence about both the need for services to support families and the effectiveness of those services is necessary. The report looks at practical initiatives to support families in housing, healthcare, education, and of course more research to be conducted around the impact of mental health problems on families and particularly on the impact of service families of alcohol misuse and domestic violence. So we recommend that more research is done in the findings of this report, which you can find in this document here. It's called Unsung Heroes. So the findings in this report really are that we want to see more research being done, particularly around the impact of alcohol misuse on military families, and indeed the impact of alcohol misuse on serving armed force personnel and veterans. The contribution of families to the functional capacity of the armed forces is not really fully recognised, although it's kind of innate and understood. And we believe that further amendments to the military cabinet are going to be needed if we're really going to reflect the needs of those families. As the government expands its improving access to psychological therapies work, it must seek to ensure that these services also support the needs of veterans as they grow older, and indeed, especially their families. So, in summary, I think the areas that we believe, as a charity working closely with the armed forces and the veteran community, that there really are a number of pressure points that we'd like to see more work done in. Reservists, as I mentioned earlier. Reservists remain a group few of the programmes above are being accessed by. And in Reserve 2020, there's a policy going to be brought in that 10% more reserves are going to be involved in the day-to-day operations of the armed forces. So we are looking to government to make sure that by the time this policy is in place, and hopefully well before, that there are joined up protocols and transition arrangements for reservists who really badly need those, particularly for around mental health treatment, because it's very disjointed between the transfer between Defence Medical Services and the NHS provision. Alcohol, the Ministry of Defence needs prevention and education programmes in service to make sure that alcohol misuse combined with resilience training programmes are put in place to help people cope with service life. They need to target the low ranks, those deployed in operational roles especially, because that's where the greatest levels of alcohol use are present. We've asked for the compensation arrangements around the mental health injury compensation scheme that I outlined earlier. And in relation to general practitioners, we've done some work as part of our strategic partnership role in helping GPs to understand veterans and to look out for how to encourage them to identify themselves and to support them. But that's really been done only with members of the Royal College. We would like to see all GPs really being given an introduction to how to understand and support veterans when they come across them in their communities. And then finally, the families point that I think I've hopefully made. So that really is a very, very quick gallop through the programmes that are currently available for the armed forces community and for veterans and the ones coming for families. And I hope that that's been of use or of interest to you. And if you want to find out some more about the work that we're doing as strategic partners, particularly around mental health, then I encourage you to look at our website, which is www.optellic.org. armedforcesstrategicpartnership.co.uk, and I'll make sure that the organisers actually have that information. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. That's very comprehensive. I think that covers everything really that Sue and I guys in investment and mental health. Any questions before we move on to the world of family health, which unfortunately are linked? So any questions? One thing is just 2 comments. It's just interesting that there's a lot of activity with well-coordinated voluntary groups releasing all, really quite incredible amount of investment into this area. Dan, earlier on was saying that sometimes voluntary groups, the funding can be very vulnerable, and she's absolutely right. In this case, it's not vulnerable, it's some sustainability for programs that should last for a few years. So that's very good. The only work we did at the Centre for Mental Health was around mental health and veterans, and it supported what you've been saying, Sue, the drinking culture and pressure around alcohol issues, both whilst in the service, during duties, and outside the services, seem to be a bit of a problem. But I would ask a question, the gentleman here is going to ask it.
Thanks for that. I just wondered whether you had any sort of data about service personnel generally returning to civilian life and the relative proportion of those who access mental health services compared to the general population.
King's would have some data because they have been conducting this longitudinal study. But I think that is an area of weakness. And in fact, the Forces in Mind Trust, I think, is just starting a mapping exercise, which I think will start to look at, is going to be focused on transition. I think to get a proper study site and to get an accurate assessment, I think we really are going to need to do a focused piece of work. It's an element of the follow-up work that King's do, but inevitably in a longitudinal study, at the end, people sort of drop off at the very end. And it's only those that are willing health seekers that are really being registered. But I think this is a community that often disappears and then resurfaces. And it is a difficult route to follow because it's largely a group of people, single people, and they don't necessarily, we don't really know where people go back to. The old traditions of people going back to where they were recruited from are really, I suspect, no longer the case. We don't have any really good empirical data to say that's true. So there's nothing available at the moment, but I will look out for it because I think as a community we know that we need to support better.
Okay, thanks so much. Any further points? Yes.
Is there any work being done on helping these individuals before anything happens in terms of positive ways of managing stress when they're going through, before they go into difficult situations, and awareness, at what point does a mental health condition need addressing?
Just say where you're from.
Oh, sorry, I'm from the Centre for Mental Health, Sean. Do you know that?
I know that.
Well, I think the TRIM system, I think is going to, because it is now being systematically used, I think it will begin to make people aware, hopefully, a little before they experience this, because it's done as a team, and individually. So the team does a sort of TRIM exercise, and then individuals have the opportunity to speak individually to whoever is their criminal officer. I think Surgeon General is particularly looking into a number of programs. We, indeed, ourselves, Colin at the back nodding, we've been working with the mental health first aid training programs and seem to have had particularly good effects from those. So we are starting to work in the recovery space, introducing, in fact, we're in the process of designing a course for all the personnel recovery officers in this new command unit to help them to look at, to know what to look out for, and to, hopefully by sensitising them, that there will begin to be something that actually maybe even as part of this ordinary training we might actually begin to talk about how mental health is as important as your physical health. Because in the armed forces, your physical health, your ability to be fit, is considered to be very much a physical thing rather than necessarily or the way they attack the mental health is actually through a sort of teamwork. It's a different approach. So there are signs, but you have to be, I think if you had somebody here from the Ministry of Defence, they would be cautious about that because they are ultimately focused on a particular task and trained for a particular task. And only focusing on mental well-being is something that, I think you have to get the right, they would say you have to get the right balance right. But ultimately, people as a charity concerned for this community, their mental health is just as important as their physical health as far as we're concerned. And anything you do to get them to think about that and be better prepared for it, you'll be doing it.
Okay, so thanks once again, that was great. Puts it firmly on the agenda. Let me move on then to introduce Professor Jenny Shaw. Jenny is the academic lead for the Affected Health Research Network. Jenny will do a lot of research. A lot of you will know about it.